Yo. What's going on? What's going on, y'all? We're here. We're gonna do another session. Okay, which is up on Amazon, by the way. And Riddler. That was a great race. It's very well written, well done race that happened. I was very impressed. Also, keep in mind there was a time skip as well. So by then, we know that everything happened. Whew. I spoke I spoke to the man about this, about the race and everything else. And without giving out spoilers, he kind of he kind of like told me that like yeah, the it busts wide open. But we is we are gonna okay. We are at chapter 5. So bear with me. We're gonna start. Get back, relax. Any questions or concern? Put in chat, leave a comment afterward. Message me. Don't matter. You know. But we gonna get started right now. Pull this up some a little bit more. Okay. Chapter 5. The Carnival of Carnage. Brent walked with the Dark Lord through a dank and musty stone hallway made up of endless rows of arches that curved off into the distance. Colorful rugs of the red and gold covered the floors, and similar colored tapes tries hung about in an attempt to mask the gloominess of the monastery. But assumed currently hosting the events of Dax Moxus. It was a strong and sturdy building meant as a venue to host all sorts of events, meaning its use was ultimately supposed to be more practical than aesthetic. Still, it wouldn't have killed the owners to dust the place between events. Do we really need to be here, sire? He said, his face wrinkling after taking a particularly dusty sniff at the air. The girl rightfully won the honor of competing in a championship event. Besides, this is the floor for all the honored guests. It is too opulent for you. Brent couldn't help but hear the Dark Lord's words through a sniffing of sarcasm. Opulent? Yes. I couldn't imagine a more luxurious thing than weeping lung sickness. Regardless, the Dark Lord said, we came here to see the progress you've made with teaching my young apprentice over these 8 years. The events here will be telling as to her skill and where she stands in need of improvement. I can assure you that I've specifically trained her to face any enemy she would face here. Brennan looked at the roster for the circus championship contenders. Most were Urks, but there were 2 men. Ashterra could handle those in her sleep. We will see, the Dark Lord said as if he knew something Bren didn't. The two continued until they came to a small box with 2 seats. The Dark Lord sat in the larger of the two while Brent sat in the other. A large curtain surrounded the box, concealing them from the outside. A few small holes cut in the curtain allowed Brent to see the Coliseum battleground. A roar came from the crowd below. Brent sat back in his seat and folded his arms with nothing to do but wait until the start of the battle. As Sarah sat in the seat next to the battleground of the circus, she was to compete in the championship battle at the end, but until then was allowed to watch the rest of the circus until she was called to ready herself. The circus was taking place in the evening. It was dimly lit by enchanted spotlights about the Coliseum. Despite this, the energy from the crowd filled Ashterra with a sense of excitement, the likes of which she had never felt before. The fiends in the crowd roared and chanted as they awaited the start of the event. Just then, Ashterra noticed as a rather bumptious human woman with bat wings flew above the battleground. No, not a human, a succubus from the looks of her. The succubus held up an object to her mouth, and suddenly the roar of the crowd were dwarfed by the sound of what could only have been the succubus' mediocre voice. Fiends and foes, her voice said, booming in Esther's ears. This moment you've all been waiting for. Fiends and foes, welcome to the greatest event in all the seven Fiendlands, and most certainly in the entire world. Fiends and foes, welcome to Dax Moxus. Around the Colosseum, racers of fire erupted in the air, filling the battleground with light and heat. The crowd roared in excitement, and it took all the Ashterra had to not roar with them. Fiends and foes, the succubus began again. Tonight we have a very special show for you. Tonight we will crown the circus champion. The crowd roared again. But first, we have a wonderful lineup of all sorts of glorious carnage to prime your bloodlust for the main event. To begin, we have a special announcement. Fiends and foes, we have with us tonight a very special guest. Fiends and foes, on behalf of the entire Dex Market Circus, it is my great honor and privilege to welcome with us tonight the King of Fiends himself, the Lark Lord Raxon. Ashterra looked up as spotlights lit up one corner of the Colosseum to a box for the honored guest. A curtain over the box drew back, revealing her masters seated above the crowd. The entire Colosseum exploded with excitement once again. Fiends and foes, the succubus continued. We will start off the night's events with a hunt. Several gates around the Colosseum opened and several mounted, armored beasts emerged. Ashterra looked on in awe as the beasts with their riders rode around the arena. Most of the beasts were Dernwolves and Daglions, but one beast mounted by two pale humans wearing spiked helmets was a giant spider. Ashterra looked on in awe at the parade as it circled the Colosseum. Suddenly a space in the floor of the battlefield opened up, and something started rising out of it. The crowd roared and Ashterra's jaw dropped as a massive stone shell appeared in the midst of a cage. The stone shell stood 15 meters from the bottom of its 5 stubby limbs to the top of its jagged crown. The beast got its name from the fact that its citious exterior resembled a series of long segmented boulders. Ashterra had only ever heard about this beast from stories Brent had told, and had never actually seen one. Yet it was unmistakable. The beast let out a roar and dust itself against the cage. Ashterra looked on in awe as she watched the beast smash and pound at its metal bars, seeing them bend and dent, but still held steadfast. Then, without warning, a horn bellowed somewhere in the Colosseum, and the four wall of the cage flew away. Ashterra watched with excitement as the mounted riders swarmed the stone shell. The giant beast spread out 4 of its limbs and began beating at the ground in an assault meant to smash them. The mounted riders rove in between the blows, nimbly avoiding them with a dexterity and grace Ashterra had never thought possible. One of the daring riders, brandishing a jagged spear, slipped in between 2 consecutive strikes and thrust his weapon into a soft spot on the stone shell's underside. The crowd roared as the giant stone shell recoiled, only to be stabbed by another rider. To the outer edge of the stone shell's reach, the giant spider and its riders had taken what looked like a harpoon and attached it to a large, long strand of spider milky silk. They struck at the beast, sinking the harpoon into one of the joints of the stone shell legs. The stone shell roared, then swung at the spider. The crowd let out a disappointment shout as one of the spider riders was struck and flung nearly 30 meters in the opposite direction. Ashterra winced as it happened and watched the man for a moment before realizing he wouldn't get back up. The remaining rider on the spider took his mount around the stone shell, laying down a path of silk as it dexterously dodged the giant's club-like limbs. Soon the stone shell began to slow its limbs, getting more and more entangled in the spider's silk. Then all at once the stone shell had become so entangled that it toppled over with a loud thud. The crowd roared in excitement as the man atop the spider dismounted and climbed the top of the stone shell. He lifted a jagged spear above his head for the crowd to see. The crowd began chanting, "Kill it! Kill it! Kill it!" as the spotlight focused on the Dark Lord. Rexian stood from his seat and stared at the man atop the stone shell. Then the Dark Lord lifted a gauntlet fist, his thumb pointing down. The crowd roared as the man lifted his spear and drove it into a soft spot on the stone shell's body. A glacier of ichor exploded out of the beast as if thrashed helplessly against its bonds. The crowd cheered at the spectacle as the beast's movement slowed, then stopped. A group of orcs mounted on the dragon rhinos entered the battlefield and dragged the body of the dead shell away in preparation for the next event. When the battlefield was cleared, a team of goblins came out and set up a series of poles in what would later be part of the race. The race was done by fiends on the backs of drawn chariots pulled by rat stallions, I believe that's pronounced. Large entities with split hooves and curved horns. The race was a battle between teams of drivers who frequently clashed on the track. The crowd would roar every time a driver would fall and get trampled by the chariots behind him. When that was finished, a team of gladiators faced off against three dandelions. In the end, most of the gladiators had fallen, but so had the three dandelions. Next was a battle between four large carriages that seemed more like wheeled buildings, being dragged slowly by band mammoths? Band Matham? It's I'm gonna ask him about this. I'm taking it as band mammoths. After that, a melee between runner-up fighters whom had been disqualified for the championship but commenced. Oh. It was during this that a large orc called for Ashterra had and led her down underneath the battlefield to prepare for the championship fight. Underneath the Colosseum, Ashterra was stunned to see a variety of exotic beasts and previous combatants dressing wounds. Though she didn't show it, the orc led her to a platform similar to the one that brought the stone shell up to the battlefield. Stand here and wait for the championship bout, he snapped. Ashira did what she was instructed, but gave the orc a scold nonetheless. Can't believe they accepted you as a wild card combatant and who doesn't look like she's cut her teeth with a sword, let alone used one. I don't care if the Dark Lord pulled a few strings for you to be here. I don't think you'll last more than 30 seconds up top. It's a disgrace to the circus, that's what it is. The orc spat in her direction. She wanted to grab him by the throat but refrained. No, it wasn't the time for petty retaliation. She just had to show him and all like him just what she could do. Brent watched the final moments of the melee with disinterest. He didn't care for this kind of sport. It was crash and low for his likes. Finally, a winner emerged, an orc with two large blades. He had his opponent, another orc by the hair. The crowd began to chant, "Kill him! Kill him! Kill him!" Before the spotlight filled the box, the Dark Lord stayed seated and lazily held out a gauntlet fist with the thumb down. The orc took his opponent and decapitated him. He held up the head for the crowd, then opened his mouth to take in the droplets of black orc blood that dripped from it. That would make for a few fine orc children, no doubt, Brennan murmured. The succubus announcer took to the sky above the battleground as a crew of orcs goblins came to clean up the previous event. Fiends and foes, she said. Please give it up for our new champion of the melee, Fergus. Doric held up his arms, the head of his last opponent still in hand. Brent was caught off guard from the name. Fergus. That was the second favorite championship to the incumbent champion. He should have been in the championship bout. Brent looked to Rexian, who sat skulled in his seat. Maybe Brent had made a mistake when reading up on the event, or maybe Fiends and foes, now it's time for our main event. The moment you all been waiting for, the championship bout. The court roared a bloodthirsty roar. And thanks to our most honored guest, the Dark Lord himself, we have something special tonight. Brent looked at Rexton, then back at the battlefield. Tonight, the succubus continued, we have a special announcement. unannounced roster for our contenders. But first, let's hear it for our current reigning champion. You know him, you love him, you watched him kill his way to the top. Fiends and foes welcome our incumbent champion, Zargan. The second adjusted to a corner of the arena, where an orc dressed in poorly repaired rubber armor rode in on the back of an aged ironwood. Brent looked at him, curious. Judging by his armor, the orc seemed like he was formerly one of the elites of Rakton's armies. Most orcs who attained the status of barbar stayed that way until death or they were exiled. The orc seemed familiar, but Brent had no idea from where. The champion circled the battleground before coming to a stop in front of the gate where he entered. Beings and foes, the suckbees began. Now it's time to reveal to you our new champion roster. If you thought that you cheated your favorites from the entire season, don't worry, these fiends are more than capable of butchering. First, we have us a contender so monstrous he was banished from Markstrom, only to spend his days butchering and murdering everything unlikely enough to cross his path. For years, he left a wake of blood until he was captured and entered into confines of Grandex dungeons until this day. Fiends and foes, please welcome Rook Maglai. Bryn Gate as a 10-meter tall orc was raised from the floor of the arena. Brenna heard of this monster before and knew that he was stronger, more brutal, and much more sadistic than any other orc in Moxdrum. Before he had been captured, he had a habit of kidnapping smaller fiends and chewing their limbs off one by one, slowly until they eventually died. Many legless and armless bodies would be found stretched over kilometers in between villages. He was left to rot in the dungeons of Grandex for the rest of his days for his crimes, last he checked. The only way he'd be able to compete today was if the Dark Lord had allowed it. Brent looked at his lord with horror as the succubus continued. Fiends and foes we have with us here a marvel of modern necromancy. A mix of fiend and machine so inspired it could only have been ripped out of your nightmares. Fiends and foes all the way from Hashtrek, standing at a towering 15 meters. Let me hear you make some noise for Dead Steam. Okay, so did the Dark Lord just say, screw it, I'm gonna sit here and I'm gonna let loose in this tournament the most dangerous orcs that he could possibly allow in this? That's how it's coming off. From what it looked like from what I'm reading from based on what how Brent is reacting to these. A massive skeleton covered in gears and beams of metal rose from the ground. The contraption was an automation built around the remains of a long extinct giant. Its ribcage housed a system of pipes and gears, steam leaking from some of the joints between pipes. Steam rose from between the mechanism teeth and eye sockets as it stood stiff like a board. Then suddenly it sprung to life, lifting up an arm with a large, sharp metal hook and another with a spinning blade of a gigantic saw. It opened its mouth and bellowed a cloud of steam as it roared a strange roar that sounded like a mix between a growl and a pipe organ bellowing. Grant could only imagine how such a thing could have made it here, but he knew that only Lord Rexley could have made it possible. Fiends and foes, for our next contender represents you, a fiend, so rare that his kind are often thought of as a myth. When he was born, he was forced to fight and kill over 100 siblings born with him and eat their bodies to survive. Fiends and foes, Dax Moxes presents to you a very special contender, creature of practical legend, Atterra. From the battlefield floor, a large, cinderious creature appeared. The creature had a long and serpentine body like a centipede and wore 6 long swords on its side. Brennan heard of this before. It was fiend called a syndicate. As the Scotians had said, syndicates were so rare that they were practically legend among the lower classes of fiends. Syndicates were sentient arthropods and on average were smarter than humans by a significant margin. Their rarity was due to their particular life cycle. A female syndicate would impregnate herself with an unwilling male, then eat him. Well then she would lay several batches of eggs deep underground. For each of those batches, only one of the hatchlings would survive after eating the others. The few syndicated breed had heard of worked as mercenaries and were rumored to be worth that of 10 cell swords. As Atterra threw his 6 swords and performed a kata, Brain could easily see the rumor had weight. Fiends and foes, for our final contender. Taking the wild card spot, we have a mysterious contender who we was able to enter the ranks based on recommendation alone. Brent looked at the competition Siri was put up against and couldn't help but suppress a sense of impending dread. Ashterra was talented with a blade. That was true, but could she even hold a candle to the competition she was about to face? I thought the original roster seemed a little bland for my apprentice, so I pulled a few strings, the Dark Lord said. Brent had already figured that Royal Wrestling had a hand in this, but his admission just made Brent even more bewildered. Are you trying to get her killed? He said. I'd be a poor master if I didn't. Brent sat back in the seat and prayed to any god who would listen that Asher would survive this battle. So pretty much it's Asher against every fucking most wanted criminal killer on the face of this planet. Pretty much. Ashterra stood still as she slowly rose up to the hole in the ceiling that had opened up. From here, she could hear the succubus announcer speak. Fiends and foes, this final combatant is as mysterious as she is young, standing at just above 1.5 meters. Dox Maxis presents to you the prodigy of the Dark Lord himself, the apprentice Ashterra. Ashterra passed through the hole and appeared in one side of the Coliseum battlefield. To the sound of jeers and boos from the crowd. Wow, what? Why we hating on her though? Oh yeah, that's right, because she's human. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. She ignored them and quickly scanned the arena for her opponents. There was a orc mounted on a direwolf, a ogre, some kind of mechanical skeleton, in which she could only describe as a giant centipede with swords. As Sarah smirked, this is gonna be fun, she thought. And now, the succubus announcer continued. What our honored guest Lord Rex to do is the honor of signaling the beginning of this year's championship bout. As Shira glanced up to the corner of the arena towards the spotlights that were on her master, the Dark Lord stood, then his voice boomed throughout the arena. Combat's ready! As she drew her warlock's blade, and the blade of a folded sword erupted from its hilt. She was going to attack the giant centipede first, and from the looks of it, it had the same idea for her. Fight! Bren watched as Shira ran towards the centipede. As he to her, if Bren had a heart, it would have been racing uncontrollably. Of these opponents, the Syndicate was the one he was most worried about. When the young woman reached him, she slid on her knees, avoiding several slashes and a downward stab from the Syndicate's blades. She swiped at his legs with what appeared to be a folded sword. The blade would be ineffective against Syndicate's Shitterious armor, but she must have hit a softer joint as the Syndicate recoiled from the strike. A second blade erupted from the opposite end of Esther's weapon, creating a blade staff that she twisted and spun to fend off the Syndicate's counterattack. Brent looked for the other combatants and saw they were focused on attacking one another instead of ganging up on Ashterra. It made Brent release a small sigh of relief, but he was drawn back to Ashterra's current fight. She moved swift and graceful, taking her time and slashing when the Syndicate left an opening. Under normal circumstances, Brent would be happy with her progress, but the fact that her attack seemed to do nothing to the Syndicate didn't sit well with him. No, 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 you'll never get through his shinnet that way, he said under his breath. Astera continued her attack and the Syndicate blocked and countered as dexterously as if the swords he held were mere extensions of his limbs. The Dark Lord let out a grunt of disapproval which ripped Brent's attention away from the fight onto his lord. Lord Raxterian was seated in the way that he spoke that he was displeased. I should have her whipped for this, he grumbled. For fighting? That makes no sense. She might even die from this encounter. She won't die, Lord Rexon said. She's merely toying with him. What? Brent said. Brent looked back on the battlefield and then he was what Rexon had. Astera was moving swift, sure. Her attacks brutal, but she didn't seem strained, pressured, nor winded. In fact, she seemed amused. The concern drained from Brent like wine from a drunkard's cup was replaced with irritation and a sense of pride. That girl, he said, unable to hold back a smile. Ashura deflected the centipede's attack with ease. He was fast and fluid, but he was awfully repetitive. Once Ashura had learned his basic moves, said she realized that he only used slight variations outside of a basic set of attacks. The fight had been fun at first, but now it was beginning to get boring. After one particular volley of strikes, she struck at some of the soft spot in between his shell plating and hopped backwards, giving them both some substance. The centipede rubbed the areas that she had hit, then eyed her with what could only be described as frustration. At least as frustration could look like on the face of an insect. I'm getting bored. Let's end this, she said. The two ends of her warlock blade evaporated and were replaced with a single sharp spike at one end. She held up a hand and gestured for the centipede to come to her. She heard him let out an angry snort, then charge as fast as he could. Ashterra jumped right when he swung at her with his sword. She performed a backflip over his head and drove her warlock blade through his head shell. She landed behind him and turned to look as the syndicate dropped his swords and clawed at the warlock's blade that now stuck out of his head. His movements grew twitchy and he stumbled as he ran around the battlefield, clutching at the warlock's blade. Finally, he crashed into a wall of the arena and fell over motionless. Ashterra looked over at the other three combatants. The orc and the giant skeleton were both attacking the orc as fiercely as the centipede had been attacking her. Despite that, however, the orc seemed to be holding his own, dodging and bounding with his mount between the legs of the two lumbering giants. The orc was bound and dodging the swinging of the giant skeleton saw arm when Ashterra noticed the orc was preparing to grab him from behind. To her surprise, the orc saw the attack and ran his dire wolf underneath the giant skeleton, causing the orc to trip the skeleton. The skeleton started to fall, and the orc held up his hands, braced for an impact. As Sarah watches the giant skeleton saw arm got pinned between it and the orc's neck, the two fell to the ground with a thunderous tremor, and a long dark stream of gore sprayed the crowd with roar with bloodlust. The orc kicked and writhed underneath a growing lake of blood until he became still. The giant skeleton lifted itself in turn, revealing a horrifying, bloody-stained face. The thing let out a roar with a cloud of steam before beginning a charge towards the orc. It reached for the orc when it saw its arm, but the orc jumped on the arm with his mount and began running up towards the skeleton's face. This is actually good. As the orc was about to strike, the skeleton snorted a jet stream from its nose hole, causing the orc's mount to stumble. The stumble was short, but the skeleton swiftly swung up with its hook arm and knocked the orc's mount from under him. The orc fell to the battleground with a crash and stumbled as he tried to regain his footing. Ashterra watched as the orc looked up, horrified as he saw his turned mount impaled on the hook, but winning and howling in pain and still alive. The giant skeleton raised a buzzing saw arm and sprayed of the red mist showered the area as it sliced the dying roof in two. The crowd let out a thunderous roar as Esther saw the orc grit his teeth. If she didn't act now while the giant skeleton was distracted, the orc would more than likely fall and Esther would have to fight the giant herself. It would be a grand victory. The young girl feeling the giant, but Esther wasn't about to let the reigning champion of Darksiders go out without a murmur. No, if he were gonna die, it would be by her hand. Ashterra ran towards the body of the centipede and pulled her warlock blade from its head. She then ran towards the giant skeleton in the blink of an eye. Ashterra covered the distance between the two. She saw the orc's eyes widen and its mouth fall open in surprise as she jumped to 3 meters from the ground to the giant skeleton's knee with ease. The knee was a tangle of pipes and pistons. If her hypothesis was correct, then if she punctured one of the pipes, Ashterra drove her warlock's blade into one of the pipes on the giant's knee contraption and a hot hiss of steam shot out. Almost immediately, the giant skeleton stumbled as it tried to stand on a leg that would no longer give itself support. Ashterra landed below the giant, her warlock blade still in hand. As she looked up to see the face of the giant skeleton, she looked into the thing's empty eye sockets as if it looked like it was puzzling out if she had been the cause of its stumbling. Ashterra smirked at it. Suddenly, the orc ran past Ashterra. She looked at him and watched as he ran towards the giant skeleton's other leg. When he reached it, he jumped back, kicking off the flat surface of the skeleton's shin twice, and sunk his sword into the pipe of the second leg mechanism. Steam hissed where he sword swung, and soon the giant fell on its knees. A lower snap through the arena as the giant skeleton's femurs exploded in a hail of bony splinters. The giant fell forward, its saw arm spinning. It fell on its own saw to the sound of loud piercing screech of metal grinding against the metal. Sparks flew across the battleground like arrows, Followed by a geisha of oil, the oil quickly lit on the spark and rushed towards the skeleton. An explosion of flame engulfed the remains of the giant as the crowd jeered and roared. Ashterra now turned towards the orc, the arena alit with the fire burning from the giant skeleton. In its glow, the orc held his sword and shield in a wondering stance. The spike dissolved from Ashterra's warlike blade and reformed into a long blade, solid sword breaker. The orc smiled at her like he knew she was a worthy opponent to fight. Ashterra smiled back. The arena seemed to go silent. Ashterra stared down the orc and he her. Then the roar of the crowd came back as she and the orc charged one another. This is interesting. Brent had been sitting at the edge of his seat the entire fight. He felt sweat trickling down his brow, but was too focused on Ashterra to remove it unless he missed something. Ashterra now fought the reigning champion Zagan. The orc had proved more than capable as he fought the two giant contenders alone, for the most part. Now he faced Brent's little girl. The orc was skilled, providing that the rubber armor he wore was not simply for show. He parried and struck at Ashterra, making sure to avoid her blade. Ashterra was wielding a sword breaker, and he seemed to be aware that she could easily hook his blade and wrench it from his hands at the slightest misstep. One of Ashterra's attacks caused the orc to stumble backwards, and she took advantage of the opening by aggressively beating him further back. Lord Raxon chuckled, and Bryn started to murder to himself. Come on, you got this, he said. The orc suddenly found his footing again and pushed forward with his shield. Ashterra managed to catch herself mid-attack and rebound off the shield. Both fighters took a moment to compose themselves. Despite the level of aggression they had been showing, neither seemed slightly tired nor winded. Instead, they both just stared at each other with a cool, composed eyes. Byrne wanted to know what was going on in both their heads, but he refrained from listening in. He felt excited, terrified, thrilled, mortified, and everything in between. If he had a heart, he knew it would be trying to jump out of his throat. Brent could feel the tension mounting as the two continued their stares, and suddenly they ran back at each other. Ashterra sprinted towards the orc, her heart pounding in her ears like a drum. She wanted to dance to its beat, to twist and turn as she flung her weapon about. But first, she needed to get to the orc. Ashterra dispelled the swordbreaker and caused her weapon to transform into a meteor hammer. She reached the orc. She could use a damn hammer? Really? Okay, we're going with this. She reached the orc and he was midway through her strike towards her. She bounded to the air, took the meteor hammer and wrapped its chain around its blade. She performed a flip over his back and landed behind him, pulling on the two ends of the meteor hammer's chain. She felt the wrench from the chain and then saw the orc's sword as it fell to the ground several meters away. Ashura turned, spinning one end of the meteor hammer above her head. The orc didn't waste time being surprised and charged her with his shield. Rubber shields were weapons unto themselves, their edges sharpened and shaded in case they were disarmed in close combat. The orc swung his shield about, forcing Assyria to dodge. She threw one end of the meteor hammer at the orc, but he parried it and immediately struck. Assyria spun, barely missing the shield and bringing the meteor hammer back towards herself. Okay, I see how it is now. Okay, it makes sense. The end of the meteor hammer struck the orc's shield, denting it and causing the orc to stumble. Asteria took advantage of the situation, jumped and kicked at the orc's shield with both her feet. The orc fell backwards from the kick and rolled with the fall before planting his feet. Asteria didn't let him stand, however, and swung her meteor hammer towards him. Both ends of the weapon struck the orc's shield, jarring it from his hands. The orc's arm hung motionless, the weight of flesh bulging told Esther that her blow had dislocated it at the shoulder. The orc reached for a dagger seated at his boot, but Esther kicked him to his back before he could draw it. The fight was over. Brent jumped from his seat with a cheer as the rest of the crowd roared with excitement. Esther stood over her opponent, her warlock's blade having transformed into a sword, the blade of which pinned the former champion to the ground by his neck. Ashterra hadn't delivered the final blow, but any sudden moves from the orc would mean its end. The succubus announcer boomed throughout the arena once again. Fiends and foes, it looks like this fight is just about over. What do you say, Lord Raxtiran? The crowd started chanting, Kill him! Kill him! Kill him! Brandon looked to Lord Rex, who simply stared at his apprentice. If he commanded Esther to kill the former champion, she would, but he didn't move, let alone utter a command. Bryn knew what this meant. He was curious to see what his apprentice would do for herself. Brent looked back to the arena to Ashterra. She stared at the orc, her red eyes alight with a kind of rage. The crowd continued to chant as they were waiting for her to plunge her blade into the orc's neck and finish him. However, she didn't move, then stepped back, withdrawing her blade. The crowd booed and jeered as she stepped away. Brent could see her lips move, the shapes they made matching the words. Your life is mine, to do with as I will. From this day on, you will serve me as my thrall. With that, she turned to an open gate at one end of the arena. The orc stood rubbing his neck as she walked away. He could have run to his sword, picked it up, his shield, and charged her with his his back turned, but he didn't. He understood that would be craven, but he also knew it would mean his death. Bran watched, awestruck, confused, and proud. He watched as Ashterra walked onward, and through the open gate, a champion amidst shouts of jeers and boos. That was a good fight. I like that. That was good. That was good. All right. So, Ashterra won the whole tournament and now has a thrall that she earned by winning and beating a former champion, being champion herself. Y'all, that's chapter 5. Hey, seriously, link to this book. It is by Indiana Atwood. He is actually working on, this is going to be actually a whole series, and he's actually working on it too. That's the crazy thing. Y'all, chapter 6 is called The Age of Change. We're going to get on that soon, y'all. Seriously. If you want to check out this book, the link to the book is in the description. It is on Amazon. Do give him a check out, give him a shout out if we can. I'm very proud of this man for making this book. Book's actually very damn good. I'm liking these fights too. These fights are very well described. I'm enjoying it. Seriously. Yo, that's our session for this week for the Dark Lady. I appreciate y'all coming by. Even if you came back for a minute. Be sure to check it out. Check out the next time we do this. If you have not, it's your first time here, I do have this whole series in the playlist. Y'all also check out my other content. Do make sure y'all have a good rest of y'all day. Stay out of bad trouble. Good trouble is okay, y'all. Indiana, excellent work, man. Loving it. Loving it. Because I know he gonna see this. Loving it, man. Well done. Well done. It's getting better. He said it was gonna be, he said the chapter's gonna be alright. Yeah. Thank y'all. Thank you again for coming by. Till next time, y'all. We out of here. Great day.